Good evening, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Dark and Disturbed Tales. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. Tonight, we learn the meaning of survival. Since the beginning of time, civilizations have come and gone. Some fall, while others simply vanish. Tonight, we turn the page on ourselves and see what could be waiting for us at the end of the road. Cannibals, mutants, crooks, and wild dogs are just another day in the wasteland. Welcome to The Day After Yesterday, Chapter 1, Slim Pickens. Written by Leon Hamilton. Narrated by The Nightwatcher. Featuring the Ghost of 94 and September from Tales of September.
Sitting on the roof of his apartment complex, Alex watched the city burning against the night sky. He didn't know how or why any of this had happened, but it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered now was staying alive. For a second, he thought about his family and friends that might have survived. The thought of never seeing his parents again saddened him and filled his head with visions of the old days. In the back of his mind, he wondered how much longer would it be? How much longer could he scavenge for food and hide in the ruins, praying to a God that clearly wasn't listening anymore? Before all this started, Alex had been a graphic artist. He found it funny that he, of all people, was still alive. In the movies, it was always a soldier or a cop that fought the good fight and led others to safety. But not some guy who was good at drawing and could barely start a campfire without ending up with third-degree burns. He sat there, watching the fireballs streak up into the sky. No doubt, from an exploding gas station or maybe survivors fighting it out over the last few scraps of food. It really didn't matter. Hopping down off his stoop, he gathered up his gear. A backpack filled with beef jerky, water, and extra ammo for the AK-47 he found in the remains of an old crack house. He walked the darkened halls of the building, using the wall as his guide. Using lights was dangerous. Any little thing could attract nomads or even worse, cannibals. And in either case, he wouldn't be able to fight them off by himself. Slowly moving, he did his best to stay quiet. As he made it to the stairwell, a sound echoed through the building, echoing down the empty halls. For a second, he thought it was just his imagination, wishful thinking, or maybe he had finally gone over the edge and lost his mind. Then he heard it again.
Is anyone there? Hello? Someone please help us!
Was this a trap? It had to be. No one would be stupid enough to be making that much noise. When he opened the door that led to the stairs, the overwhelming stink of rotting bodies gagged him. After putting on his mask, Alex pulled out his flashlight and clicked it on. Since there were no windows in the stairwell, there was no risk of the light being spotted, so it was safe. Peering over the rail, he shined the light down on the pile of rotting corpses stacked up on the bottom of the floor. While the smell was horrific, and looking at all of them made his stomach lurch, they turned most scavengers away, leaving the upper floors pretty much untouched. He had been in this building for weeks now, and this was the first time anyone had come close to finding him. The voice cried out again as he made his way down to the 3rd floor.
Is anyone there? Hello? Someone, please help us.
Alex froze in place and clicked off the light just as the 1st floor entrance to the stairwell opened. He stood there, perfectly still, listening to what sounded like a woman puking her guts out. When the door slammed shut, he rushed down to the 2nd floor landing and stopped to listen. He could hear a woman's voice, but couldn't make out what she was saying. The one thing he heard clearly was,
It's okay. It's okay. Mama's gonna get you some help.
It sounded as if she were talking to a child. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he made his way to the front door and stopped. Taking a quick second to get his mind right, Alex checked his rifle, then opened the door and stepped out. Looking around, he didn't see her at first, but it took a few seconds before he heard her voice again.
It's okay, sweetie. We're going to find help.
Making his way up to the corner of the building, he finally saw her and took aim. From what he could tell, she was a typical wanderer, thin and dirty, dressed in rags. She was just a few feet away with her back to him. The problem was, he couldn't see who she was talking to. Speaking loud enough for her to hear him, Alex barked.
What are you doing here?
His voice startled the woman. She flinched before turning to see Alex standing there aiming a gun at her.
Please, don't shoot. Please, don't shoot.
Who are you talking to?
Keeping her hands where he could see them, she shook her head.
No one. Please don't shoot me. I'm just passing through.
He knew what he had heard, and she was lying.
I know you're here with someone. Now cut the shit. Where are they?
Nervously nodding, she slowly motioned to her left, and a young girl stepped out from the doorway, just out of his sight. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. They both looked like they hadn't eaten in a while. The girl's legs were wrapped in torn pieces of a t-shirt. She was bleeding, and her clothes were torn.
Please, sir. Please, sir. My daughter and I were attacked by a pack of wild dogs. We need help.
A few years after things went to hell, packs of wild dogs became a huge problem. A small pack of 3 or 4 good-sized dogs could kill a man. A girl that size didn't stand a chance. Something about these two just didn't feel right to him. If they'd survived the dogs, they had to have had weapons, and Alex didn't see a gun.
How'd you get away?
The look of fear slipped from the woman's face as she smiled, then hissed.
My husband killed them.
Before he could pull the trigger, something hard came down on the back of his head, and Alex dropped to the ground, unconscious. When he came to, his bag and gun were gone.
Ugh, fuck me. I should have known better.
Rolling over to his back, he let the rain wash the dirt off of his face as he stared into the sky. Life was hard for him before the world fell apart. Now, even as he was amazed that he hadn't died yet, thoughts of the old world floated through his mind. He could remember watching airplanes soar through the sky and cars zooming along the highways. He missed his computers, and as much as his job got on his nerves, he actually missed it too. Getting up from the ground, dusting himself off, Alex went back to the apartment building. He had other backpacks and an assortment of melee weapons, but that was his only rifle. On top of that, he was running low on water. Losing the gun meant getting more was going to be a lot harder. The rainwater was okay, but it wouldn't last. The choice was simple. He was going to have to risk it and go out. When the rain passed, it was time to get moving. Knowing there was a chance he wouldn't make it back to the building for a few days, Alex piled junk around the stairwell door before he left. The junk wouldn't fool anyone, but most scavengers wouldn't waste time going through a building like this. It was too risky. Once he was satisfied that the building was secure, he started walking. The trip wouldn't take that long, but he was going to be moving slowly, trying to keep out of sight. The first area he would have to get through was the neighborhood that surrounded his complex. For the most part, it had been abandoned years ago. Huge sections were burnt to ash during the riots. The rest of the neighborhood had been picked clean, but from time to time, nomads would hold up there for weeks before moving on. Nomads were scavengers. They trade in drugs, alcohol, and tobacco, primarily. But don't underestimate them. They're cold-blooded killers and won't hesitate to strip a wanderer to the bone if they see a profit in it. He had problems with them in the past. A group nearly killed him a few months back over a bottle of water, and he wasn't in a hurry to deal with them again. The first few blocks were quiet, considering there was no place to hide. He couldn't be happier. Once he passed the rows of burnt-out homes, he hid in the overgrown bushes of an old house. The place reminded him of where he'd grown up. Even though it was a husk of a rotted wood and broken windows, he couldn't help but smile, glancing over at the tire swing that somehow still swayed in the breeze. Little things like that gave him flashbacks, and he wondered if the world would ever go back to the way it used to be. When he was sure there was no one on the street, he emerged from his hiding spot and moved on to the next block. The second he turned the corner, he saw a problem. There was an old shopping cart filled with scrap sitting in front of one of the houses. He had checked this area not too long ago, and that cart wasn't there back then. Someone had to be close by. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, he crossed the street and hid just inside the doorway of another house. Patiently waiting for someone to come back to the cart, he crouched there in the dark. No one showed. He was about to move on, thinking maybe someone had abandoned the cart, when a figure stepped out of the house. A tall, thin man, dressed in a dirty trench coat, casually stepped out into the yard and scanned the area. After a few seconds, he whistled, and a second, smaller figure came out. It was a kid. From where he was hiding, Alex couldn't tell if these were the people that had jumped him. He didn't see the woman. Watching from the shadows, he waited until they were nearing the end of the street to make a move. When he was sure they were far enough away, he slowly stepped out, rushed to the next home, and hid again. Continuing like this, he cleared the street and made it to the end of the block.
Help! Help! Help!
The sound of a child screaming cut through the silence. He didn't want to get mixed up in someone else's problem, but the way the child was screaming made his blood run cold. Moving up to the last house on the street, Alex peeked around the corner and spotted a group of 4 men surrounding the tall man and the kid. One of the men was holding the kid while the other stripped the man of his clothes, then beat him to death before hacking his body up. The cannibals. Alex watched as they dumped all the scrap out of the cart and tossed in the hunks of human flesh, making their haul easier to carry. There was nothing he could do for the man, but the kid didn't deserve to die like that. No one did. Powerless without a gun, he was forced to stay silent and watched as they did horrible things to that child before one of them ended it by stomping on his skull. Tossing the lifeless body with the scraps of what Alex guessed was his father, they walked away laughing. When they vanished into the night, he continued his journey. The sun would be coming up soon. As dangerous as the nights were, the light of day only made things worse. During the day, what was left of the local population came out of hiding. With no gun, he would be an easy target, and losing what little food he was carrying would be a death sentence. Looking around the street, he spotted an old 2-story house that was barely standing.
Well, better than nothing,
he thought, running towards the old husk. Once he had gotten inside and hidden his bag, Alex pulled the machete out and started searching through the rubble. There wasn't much to find. Most of the walls had been stripped down to the studs. A pile of old bones were piled up in what used to be a fireplace. He couldn't tell if they were human or not, but it really didn't matter. Heading for the kitchen area, he spotted something odd. There was an old mattress propped up against the back door. Over the years, he'd seen plenty of things like this. It usually meant someone had been there recently. Stopping in his tracks, he stood there listening for signs of movement. It could have been from the tall man and the kid. There was no way to tell. In any case, he dragged the mattress upstairs in a hurry, then settled in to let the day pass. When the sun finally started to set, he grabbed his gear and headed out. The day had been silent. Other than the pack of dogs and a handful of wanderers, there hadn't been much action. He walked the streets cautiously, being sure to occasionally switch directions to keep anyone from tracking him. By the time he'd made it to the outer edge of the neighborhood, it was dark. From here, he was going to have to take the highway. It meant he would be exposed, but there was no other way to the warehouse district. In the distance, he could hear gunfire. There was no way for him to tell how close they were, so he picked up his pace to a light jog. When he made it to the old highway, he took cover under the remains of an overpass and waited to hear if anyone was close by. It was a good thing he did. Within minutes, a small group came walking by. They hadn't noticed him, but that didn't stop his heart from pounding. By the look of them, he guessed they were nomads, but it was too hard to tell. It wasn't like people walked around with flags advertising who they were. Clutching his machete, he watched them move, scavenging and searching for anything. Many old cars littered the road, and they searched each one as they passed. When they finished, they piled a few items they'd found into a burlap sack and pushed on. The rest of his walk on the highway was fairly uneventful. Along the way, he found an old soccer ball that he kicked as he walked past. He then came to a concrete guardrail, which he climbed over. When he reached the bottom of the incline that led up to the road, he stopped. Not 10 feet away from him was a cardboard box that seemed to be moving. Pulling his machete from his belt, he approached it slowly and tapped it with his foot. A soft whining came from the box, and he instantly recognized the sound. It was a puppy. Kneeling down, he opened the flaps to see a small brown and white dog. His first thought was to bash it to death and use it for food. But as he looked down into those warm, sad-looking eyes, he smiled. Having a companion might just be what he needed. Scooping it up into his arms, it licked his face, then playfully chewed at his fingers. He chuckled and spoke softly.
Well, shit. Guess you're coming with me.
Walking and talking to the pup, he rolled through lists of names for her. Eventually, he landed on Cheeto. Naming him after his favorite snack seemed a little weird at first, but he liked it. By the time he made it to the warehouse district, he was exhausted. Since there was no hurry to get back, he made camp in the first building he came to. Once he was sure his tracks were covered and he was shielded from the outside world, he got a fire started. After a small meal of beef jerky that he shared with Cheeto, he settled in to get some rest. Laying by the fire, he slowly dozed off with her in his arms. Waking up to puppy breath, as she licked his nose, made him smile. The fire had died while they rested, but it didn't matter. It was time to get moving. After hours of searching, he found a few bottles of water, a first aid kit, and an old moving pad he could use as a blanket. It wasn't the best haul, but it would have to do. After sharing some water, he gathered up his things and hit the road.
And now, Chapter 2, Greener Pastures, narrated by The Nightwatcher, featuring the Ghost of 94, Olivia Steele, Beatlesfanize, and yours truly, Steve Taylor.
Months had passed, and the rainy season was almost over. Alex looked up. With Cheeto's help, he'd found a plastic tarp and a small amount of usable lumber. He used it to build a water collector that he set up in apartment 15 because there was a hole in the roof. Cheeto had grown to be the best thing to ever happen to him. She was fearless and very, very protective, and great at finding food. Over the past few weeks, Alex had come across a new hunting rifle and a revolver, along with a few rounds for both. While they weren't in the best condition, they worked. The places he'd been scavenging for beef jerky had been picked clean, and now he was going to have to find a new source for food. Being a city boy limited a lot of his survival skills, but as a child, his father would take him hunting, and while he hadn't gone in years, he felt confident that he would still be able to get it done. The upside was he wouldn't have to journey out to the countryside to hunt. There was plenty of raccoons and possums in the city. As the sun set on another day, Alex and Cheeto set out for the bayou. Once they found a good spot and settled in, it wasn't long before he spotted his first target. Moving slow and staying quiet, he took aim at the big fat raccoon that was traveling along the bank. Calmly breathing out, he took the shot. It was a hit. In the excitement of the moment, he ran to claim his kill with Cheeto right behind him. It was amazing. They stayed out there most of the night, and by the time they were ready to head home, they had had 4 raccoons and 2 possums to their names. While he was gathering up everything for the trip home, Cheeto started growling and barking at the tree line. Pulling his pistol and turning to get a look, he heard a shot and felt a bullet zip past his ear. Firing blindly and ducking behind some nearby rocks, he heard someone yell out,
"You're hunting on my land! Leave your kill, and I'll let you walk out of here."
There was no way he was leaving without what he had come for, but whoever this was had the drop on him. He couldn't see where they were. Grabbing his rifle and using the scope, he scanned the area the shot had come from. A shadow moved near a tree, and he fired. The sound of someone screaming in pain let him know he'd hit his target. Keeping a tight grip on Cheeto's leash, the two of them hurried out of there. It had been a few days since the bayou, and life was good. He dried most of the meat, and with the storm rolling in, he'd have plenty of water. Cheeto was doing her usual patrol around the building, and Alex was reading one of the books he'd found at the library. The sound of Cheeto's barking made him snap to attention. She never made a sound unless someone was around, and the fact that she was cutting up meant there was a problem. Grabbing his pistol and rushing out into the hall, he could hear something banging against the door of the stairwell. He found Cheeto on the second floor landing, barking at the door. As he came up behind her, it swung open. A pair of drenched figures came rushing in out of the rain and froze as they spotted Alex aiming a gun at them. It couldn't be a coincidence. These people had to be connected to the ones who had robbed him a while back.
Leave now,
he demanded as they put their hands up.
We're just looking for a dry place to lay low for a while. We don't want any trouble.
It was a woman's voice, but she sounded older. Looking them over, Alex didn't trust them. He'd been duped before, and he wasn't falling for it again.
Not my problem. Keep it moving.
Keeping her hands up, she took a step forward and reached for the handrail. Cheeto instantly attacked. The woman screamed as Cheeto sank her teeth into her arm. The other person turned out to be an old man. He snapped into action. Pulling a knife and lunging towards the dog, Alex didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot that stopped him in his tracks. Once he gave Cheeto the signal, she released the woman, then moved back to his side. Doing his best to sound convincing, he yelled,
Put the knife away and get out of here, or I'll add you to the pile.
Looking over at the mound of rotting corpses, the two of them slowly backed towards the door. Clutching her arm, the lady yelled,
You can't do this! We'll die out there!
As they backed out and vanished into the pouring rain. Once the door slammed shut, he let out a sigh of relief and took a seat on the stairs. A part of him wondered what she could have meant by that. It was only rain. What were they scared of? Cheeto was wagging her tail and licked the side of his face. Smiling and getting to his feet, he looked down at her.
Good girl. Let's get this door locked down so we don't have to do that again.
Using some chain and an old padlock he'd found, Alex secured the door, then went back up to his floor and sat by the window reading. As the night rolled in, the storm got worse. Alex took Cheeto and moved down to the second floor to stay warm. All the windows had been boarded up on that floor, and it was the only place he could have a fire for the night without attracting attention. After they'd eaten and settled in, it wasn't long before he dozed off. The sound of men shouting disturbed his dreams, forcing him awake. Bolting up from his resting spot, he raced to the stairs, then up to the roof to get a look at what was happening. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see, but As he approached the edge of the roof, he caught sight of them. A group of people were dragging the old man he chased away out from under a pile of old lumber. He didn't see the woman, but he guessed they either had her already or were searching for her. Slipping silently back inside, he rushed to the back of the building, finding his hiding spot, and grabbed his weapons. Making sure Cheeto was quiet and locked away, he made his way to the stairwell. There was only one way into the building, and from the top of the stairwell, he would have the advantage if they happened to get inside. But first, he needed to unchain that door. If they tested it, they would know someone was in the building and come searching. He couldn't imagine how that would play out, so staying as quiet as possible, he got down to the first floor and unchained the door. Once he was in place, he waited quietly in the dark with his rifle aimed directly at the entrance. He couldn't believe this was how life was now. He could remember staying up all night playing video games and smoking weed. Now he was ambushing psychopaths and fighting to stay alive. This crazy part was his life. It was like those games he loved so much. He actually found himself enjoying it from time to time, but this wasn't one of those times. The voices outside were masked by the pouring rain. There was no way of knowing if they were close or not, but as long as that door stayed closed, it didn't matter. Thunder rumbled overhead as he lay waiting, praying no one came in. As usual, his prayers went unanswered, and the door swung open, and a man's voice called out,
"Oh shit. We got bodies over here."
Another voice from somewhere outside responded, "Check it anyway. She might be hiding in there." A burly guy wearing old fatigue stepped in and approached the stairs. As his foot hit the first step, Alex took the shot. His bullet punched through the big man's skull, and he slumped to the ground as another of them rushed in from outside. Adjusting his aim, he fired, this time hitting his target in the chest, knocking him back out of the door. A third man fired into the stairwell from outside. Then peeked around the frame of the door. Breathing out slow and steady, Alex waited for his target to peep around the corner one last time, then fired, splattering his brain in the rain. A single shot echoed through the stairwell from outside, then nothing. Time seemed to stand still as he lay there waiting for something to happen. All he could hear was the sound of the storm. After a few nerve-wracking seconds, a woman's voice called out,
"I'm coming in. Please don't sick your dog on me again."
Stepping over the bodies, she slowly came inside with her hands raised above her head.
"Look, mister, I really appreciate you helping us out, but my husband is hurt. Can we please stay here for the night? I promise we won't be in any trouble."
Alex was sure she couldn't see him, but he slowly slid back, getting further out of his sight, just in case.
Who were those guys? And why are they after you?
Clearing her throat and trying to spot him, she yelled back.
They're man-eaters. They've been chasing us for the last 2 days.
He knew how bad the cannibals could be. He'd seen it firsthand, but that still wasn't a good enough reason to let them stay. For all he knew, these two were just as bad.
There's an old two-story about 8 blocks south of here in the neighborhood. If you can make it there, you should be okay for the night.
She didn't bother asking again. Silently, she slipped back out and disappeared into the night. Alex waited for a while before going down to drag the bodies into the stairwell and relieve them of their gear before locking up for the night. When he woke up the next morning, he and Cheeto went to the roof so he could get a look around. What he saw made his heart drop. A group of at least 20 men were pouring into the neighborhood. This was bad. More likely, the men he'd killed came from this group. It was just a matter of time before they discovered the bodies. Once that happened, they'd tear this place apart till they found him and Cheeto. He'd always known this day would come, and he had made plans for it, but he didn't think it would happen so soon. He'd been setting up a cabin 50 miles north from him. The place wasn't finished, and the trip would be rough with the weather changing, but staying wasn't an option. Since he now couldn't take everything, he stashed what he could, then broke down his water collector and took the tarp. Once his bags were packed and Cheeto was on her leash, they took one last look at the place, then slipped out the back door and headed north into the forest.
As the sun sets on the wasteland, we find our protagonist and his companion forced out into the wilderness. Will they survive the trip, or become another sad story for dark and disturbed tales? Only time will tell. Well, friends, it is almost time for me to go. I do hope you will join me next time for Chapter 3 of The Day After Yesterday, Over the Hills. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. Until next time, may the darkness embrace you.